This semester, we're opening up 7 of 14 classes, so half of them to prominent outside speakers, and those are open to the public as well. All our lectures are funded by a grant from the Fred J. Hansen Institute of World Peace. So today's event continues our section on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. By coincidence, those of you who have been on campus have noticed that this section happens to coincide with a lot of spirited campus activity on the conflict. So the aim of our lecture series is to give a robust engagement of the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. So part of that is they're hearing from 2 speakers, one last week, one this week, with very different perspectives, very different backgrounds. Our students, for the broader class, also get a wide range of these. It's regrettable that a few outside groups have made some ungenerous comments about both the lecture series and myself. I told my students that maybe they're trying to make me feel like I'm on our rent after she goes to Ekman and Jerusalem. So I don't put myself in her category. I'm not worthy of anything that way. Happily though, our dean, provost, and president have unequivocally defended the lecture series, with the president even admonishing one group for a personally hostile tone of its complaints toward me. All right, so that said, this evening we're privileged to have sorry, I'm probably not going to get it right. Ms. Araf is a human rights attorney and a longtime activist for Palestinian rights. The college student I saw, I hope this is correct, that she spent a year at Hebrew University and studied Hebrew on the U.S. In 2001, she co-founded the International Solidarity Movement, a Palestinian-led movement of international and Palestinian activists and community organizations where she helps train thousands of international volunteers in nonviolent protests and in human rights monitoring and reporting. Later, Huayda worked with Free Gaza movements, which organized solidarity flotillas to challenge Israel's closure of the Gaza Strip. A number of credible analysts, including the Brookings Institute, credit the flotilla movement with bringing about a significant easing of Israel's closure, though presumably not to the extent desired by the activist movement. So because of Ms. Haral's extensive solidarity and activist experience, she offers us an exciting opportunity to think about 2 things. One is, of course, to reflect on the Palestinian-Israeli conflict, but also to think more broadly about doing international human rights activism. And we should keep in mind that there are moral and political dilemmas at stake and responsibilities for solidarity activists. So all that stuff, we really have a valuable resource today. So without further ado, let me introduce Ms. Huayda.
Syria, Bahrain, other places that have asked for international solidarity. In doing the modest things that we can do, I haven't been involved in these struggles as much as I have been actively involved in Palestine. And that's partially due to my background, which I'll tell you a little bit about, and partially due to just finding myself in a place where I was asking myself, what can I do? And I think the best way to explain that is just to go over a little bit of my background, what brought me to being, I guess, what's called an activist. I never thought, growing up that I would assume the title of an activist, but that's probably more what I'm known as. Not a mom, not a lawyer, not anything else. So I was born and raised in the United States. My parents left Palestine when my mother was about 8 months pregnant with me, and I'm the oldest of 5 children. My parents consciously wanted to make a new life in the United States. My father is from a small village that is located inside Israel. It is in what we call the 1948 territories. It's in the northern part. It's called Media. It's in what's called the Upper Galilee. And he is an Israeli citizen. So I am actually an Israeli citizen. My mom is from the West Bank town of Beit Sahur, which is probably all of Bethlehem. So it's right, it's like a sister city of Bethlehem. And when they left Beit Sahur, and still, all the West Bank is under Israeli military occupation. My father's village was not. Everyone was an Israeli citizen, but we definitely do not consider ourselves. We don't have equal rights. And I can talk a little bit more about that, but we are, at best, second-class citizens. We also use the term third-class citizens. Because Israel considers itself the state of the Jewish people, we're not Jewish. We can't relate to any of the signs that have become symbols of the state. A lot of the laws that are on the books are made to, they do discriminate against the Palestinian citizens of the state, or basically just if you're not Jewish. There are about 35 laws right now formally on the books that discriminate in one way or another against the Palestinian citizens of Israel. And again, if you want to talk in more detail about that, I'd be happy to. So my parents really didn't see a future for us living there. And I can see now as a mom, when you're thinking where's the best place for me to raise my child, they chose to make it to the United States, where they thought they could at least have an equal opportunity to get ahead, to give their kids opportunities that they didn't think that they would have, living either as third-class citizens in the state of Israel or under full Israeli military occupation. So I was born and raised here. I think I had a pretty good education. I had wonderful opportunities that I know a lot of my people haven't had a chance to have. And then when I graduated college, the question to myself was, what do I do with that? I did, as Professor Robert mentioned, spend a year studying in Jerusalem. I was at the Hebrew University. That opened my eyes to a lot of things. And so when I went and finished my degree at the University of Michigan, that's when I started asking myself, what am I going to do with the opportunities that I have had? It ended up taking me, that question ended up taking me to Jerusalem in the spring of 2000. I originally went to work for a conflict resolution program. It's called Seeds of Peace. It's a US-based organization, but it works in a lot of conflict areas. One of their big programs was the Israel-Palestine program. They have a lot more now. I think they even work in some cities in the United States, but they also work with the Balkans, in Pakistan, it's developed things with left. But the idea there was this organization took youth, Palestinian and Israeli youth, about 14 years of age. They worked with them about 14 to 16. At a time when they're young enough to still be molded and maybe get over a lot of the stereotypes that they were, maybe grew up with, it means that they hatred that might have been ingrained just because of the side of the conflict. I don't really like using that term, but they grew up on. And still, yet, old enough to be mature to understand and discuss some difficult political and other questions. After a few months of being there, the Intifada program, called the Second Intifada, and I know I've been studying the situation for the last couple of weeks, so I'm assuming everyone's familiar with that term. It broke out well. I was a program coordinator with Seeds of Peace. I started participating in a lot of demonstrations, Palestinian demonstrations that went on in the streets. Of course, I couldn't do that in my former role at Seeds of Peace, so I eventually ended up resigning from Seeds of Peace, leaving behind that program. And I have a lot of different views now on what these programs do, the positive and negative effects of them, and have actually come to the conclusion that the negatives outweigh the positives. Working in these conflict resolution programs. And some people might think that's a little bit shocking because it's never bad to talk or to meet with the other side. And it's not. And I don't have a problem meeting, talking to people. But when it's institutionalized in a program that presents people in such a difficult conflict as equals, when there aren't equal rights, it's presenting this false, it's almost like a facade that it's building, and it's not necessarily addressing the core issues. So what was happening to our kids, and I saw the effects of this while it's still at Seeds of Peace after the Intifada broke out, these kids that learned to really love their friends on, quote, the other side. And then when the Intifada broke out, it just shattered because some of the soldiers on the Israeli side were brothers or sisters of, you know, the friend that this Palestinian had. Her brother might have just been shot by, you know, a soldier that was related to her friend. Or the Israelis asking why are Palestinians out protesting when we had a peace process? Why are they ruining everything? Not necessarily realizing that while we were talking and making friends and going to camp together, it didn't really do anything to address the political situation and change the situation on the ground, where one side is living under the gun of another. And we had a center in Jerusalem that we would bring kids to the meet, and we have to go through a lot to bring the Palestinian kids. We have to get permits, we had to drive through checkpoints, we had to drive hours to get kids through checkpoints. Palestinians, Israelis didn't have any problems traveling to get to the center. And then when they go home, after speaking to their friends on the other side, the Palestinians would have to go home through checkpoints under the gun of Israeli soldiers that may be, again, the brother and sister of the friend that they were just talking to, who, after the Intifada broke out, really didn't understand why their Palestinian friends had betrayed them. There are other problems with these kinds of programs, but when you don't address the core of the conflict and you cloud it with these dialogue programs, I firmly believe you do more harm than good. Anyway, I still was working for it while I was, my other self, protesting in the streets. And so from personal experience, I know what happened. I know that Palestinians, largely unarmed, unless you want to call some people, you know, ended up picking up stones and throwing them at armed soldiers, and some people think that's violent, and that's fine, I'm not challenging that, but we were unarmed, taking to the streets, men, women, children, and facing a heavily armed military that had no qualms about shooting at us. So within the first month of these unarmed protests, you had 143 Palestinians that were shot dead. And that was before there were any Palestinian suicide bombings or these things, these excuses that Israel used to use even more military force against us. But the actual first suicide bombing, I think, came in January of 2001, if I'm not mistaken. It's about 3-4 months after the Intifada started, and after about over 1,000 Palestinians had been killed. This is not to justify suicide bombings. I don't want to do that. Any attack on unarmed civilians is illegal under international law. I also think it's immoral. That's not to say that I don't understand what can drive a person to do that. But that also became one of the things that we wanted to work on. It's like if all these people are telling us that we need to resist another way, and if we would just be more like, you know, or have our own Gandhi, or be nonviolent, then maybe we would be a more sympathetic cause, or maybe we would have our freedom. We heard a lot of that. Okay, I can take that. But it's easy also to talk and not to live in the shoes or the life of someone that could be driven to do something like turn themselves into a human law. So after the situation of, I said about after a month of the Intifada, over 140 Palestinians had been shot dead, these protests, the unarmed protests, died down about after, I'd say, 4 weeks or so. Then what happened is those in Palestinian society that had guns, had some of the security forces, some armed factions, they started using them. And that's when we say our Intifada became armed. And that those that had guns were using them to shoot at settlements, using them to shoot at military checkpoints. A few months later, I said also that the suicide bombing started, which was even more catastrophic for Palestinians because then, of course, Israel used it to say, we're fighting terror, and they have to use more military force, so they have to invade our towns and villages. They have to send F-16s and bomb our cities, towns, and villages. More closures, of course, a lot more people killed. And not many more people taking to the streets to protest, like the protests that I was joining. So the question is, that's why I said I found myself in a situation where I was in something and I'm going to do now. My original plan of going to Jerusalem was to go there for 1 year, work there for 1 year, and then come back to go to law school. That didn't happen. I ended up staying, constantly asking myself, what can I do? And I started talking to a lot of people that participated or were active community leaders in our first Intifada. I don't know if you had a chance to study that, but the first Intifada, Palestinian Intifada, was 1987, broke out at the end of 1987. It went about until 1993. A lot of the people see the formal end of the first Intifada. Some people would like to move before, but there's a lot of political factors. But the formal end of it was the signing of the Oslo Peace Accords in 1993, which took place, of course, in Washington, D.C., September 13th, I believe. Famous handshake between Chairman Yasser Arafat and then Israeli Prime Minister Yitzhak Rabin. And what that did was start what was supposed to be known as the Oslo Peace process. Unfortunately, it was anything but, well, it was a process, but it did bring about peace. And that contributed, really, that was why the Second Intifada broke out. Because from 1993 to 2000, you had this 7-year period. Actually, within the framework of Oslo, Palestinians believed that we were going to have our own state within 5 years. So 1998, Palestinians were supposed to have their own state. Now, there was, if you had a chance to study before Oslo, there was another peace process called Madrid. Madrid failed because there were some what they call key issues, final status issues that the Israeli and Palestinian side could not agree on. So what Oslo did was decide that we're going to put these issues aside and agree on what we can agree on now, and we'll decide the other stuff later. The other stuff was things like the settlements, refugees, the fate of refugees, the status of Jerusalem, water, and final borders. Pretty much the key issues in this kind of conflict. And so there were a lot of critics of Oslo. But for the most part, I think the stat is around 80% of the people were actually very happy, relieved, we're actually going to have a state of our own. Of course, a state of our own meant a state not in what a lot of non-historic Palestine, certainly my father's village wasn't going to be part of this new Palestinian state according to Oslo. But a new state, Palestinians accepted that it would be in 22% of what we consider what is our historic homeland. So Palestinians said we will recognize Israel on 78% of historic Palestine and have our state in 22%. So we're supposed to have that state by 1998. What ended up happening is Israel expanded settlements, continued to confiscate Palestinian land, flatten Palestinian trees, agriculture, uprooted over 1 million trees to make way for settlement roads. New settlements. Settlement roads are these like superhighways that connect one settlement to another. These settlements are Israeli-only settlements. You cannot, the only way you can go into settlements if you're Palestinian is if you get a special permit if you're employed to work there, and some Palestinians do work in Israeli settlements because the economy is so bad.